We are now live. Hey everybody, welcome to another week of Growth and Goals. We have a few special guests here today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. Lisa, do you want to help introduce everybody?
Yes, thank you so much. So my name is Elizaveta or Lisa Reyes. I am a member of the Omega Phi Beta Foundation Board of Directors. And today we are presenting to you strategies for becoming a successful STEM student. This discussion is aimed at providing key tools to enable young adults to become successful within their academic and eventual profession in STEM pursuits. And STEM, of course, as many of you may know by now, if you follow us especially, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Our speaker today is Dr. Yasmin Daniels. She has been featured as the chemist giving hope to children and the volleyballing scientist. No matter the title, one thing is certain: she has a genuine passion to connect with people, to nurture and inspire youth. She also advocates for STEAM, which includes art, and is always at the forefront of STEAM initiatives. Dr. Daniels has a PhD in analytical chemistry and has done a great deal of research in environmental remediation, finding ways to make the environment cleaner. Currently, she works as an industrial hygienist in government and spends a lot of her time reviewing and assessing industrial hazards like airborne particulate hazards. Her work primarily focuses on ways workers can protect themselves from health hazards while at work. And when she's not engaged at work, she's also a full-time wife, a mom, a chemistry adjunct professor, volleyball coach, mentor, and champion of STEAM outreach. So I'd like to hand it over now to our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Yasmin Daniels.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a great introduction. So I don't have to say too much more about who I am, but I'm really excited to be here today because, as Lisa mentioned, I do strongly advocate for STEAM, which is basically STEM plus art, which is what STEM has slowly started to morph into. And I also am very passionate about mentoring girls, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my presentation. But the overall takeaway from this presentation is how can you become a successful STEM student, both while you're in school and also beyond school? So I'll be sharing some tips with you, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. And I hope that this presentation will inspire you to want to pursue STEAM and STEM, and that you feel a little bit more encouraged, because one of my underlying messages is to build confidence and self-esteem in the science and technology, engineering, art, and math fields. And I did write a book about it. So I'll also talk about that in the end, how folks and students can build their confidence in pursuing these distinct disciplines. So where does it start? If you want to be successful in STEM or STEAM, and I'll be using STEM and STEAM interchangeably throughout this presentation, but it really just relates to the same thing. Where does it start? As kids, you can probably think of it starting even during our brain development, when we start to figure out language, when we start to develop our gross motor skills, our fine motor skills. We're starting to make connections. We're starting to think about things a little bit more critically. We're starting to observe. And so that's where I like to think our interest in STEM begins, and when we can start to actually nurture our curiosity and sort of encourage kids to want to pursue STEM and STEAM. So when you start to think about the developmental portions of our life, which is in our early stages, the 5 senses come to mind. So I like to think of STEM as a sensory-based discipline. And so if you think about all of the 5 senses, you have sight, touch, sound, taste, and smell. How do these relate to STEM? So let's look at them one at a time. For sight, when you have a kid or a child, they're playing with toys, blocks, Legos. These are colorful toys. Obviously, when you look in a child's play box, a lot of the toys that they play with are very colorful, and that appeals to their sense of sight. If you look at it from the scientific perspective, later on in life, when you become a scientist, you actually are using the same skills, the same senses in the lab. As a scientist, you're looking at color changes when you're doing things like reactions. And me as a chemist, I've used this type of reaction and these senses a lot of times, both as a scientist in a lab doing research and as an adjunct professor teaching this science in organic chemistry. So this is a sense that, you know, you start to work with from a very young age, but it also carries over into you being a scientist or involved in STEM. When you think about touch, you know, as a child, you're playing with different types of objects. So you may be introduced to an object that's smooth or rough to the touch. And when you look at it from the science perspective, and I like to say science because I'm a scientist, but when I use the word science for the purposes of this presentation, I'm referring to STEM or STEAM in general. But when you think about touch, obviously, as a scientist, things have different textures. And I have images on this screen as well. You see on the very bottom left, there is an image of some rocks. And you can think of it as minerals. Things found in nature have different textures for different purposes. Animals have different textures for different purposes, for survival, for, you know, all sorts of things. So we start off touching things from a very small age, making connections with them. But later on in life, when you become a STEM professional, surfaces and touch and textures actually do mean something big in those respective fields as well. So again, the interest in STEM starts from a very young age. You start to make these connections. When you think about sound, you obviously, as a child, you hear things, you like music, you hear your parents trying to communicate with you. That translates into, you know, sound, how it travels, wavelengths. And in the science and technology field, we like to think about how we can use that to amplify technology. So things like the telephone, things like, you know, speakers, you know, amplifying sound, like I said before, you know, that also is a connection to sound because we're using, you know, the sense of sound that we have to develop this technology. So again, it still appeals to our basic senses. Taste. As a child, the child is introduced to food. Oftentimes, kids start off with milk, baby milk, and then they slowly progress and transition into, you know, more complex tastes and things of that nature. As a scientist, if you work in the field of food chemistry or food science, your job obviously would be one of your jobs could be to appeal to the taste buds of your customers or your consumers or your clients. So you may be working with a company that manufactures chocolates or some kind of dessert or food. Think about French fries. When you pass a fast food restaurant, you're driving on the highway and you're so hungry and you all of a sudden get a scent. It goes past your nose. You almost automatically want to eat that. And so that sort of sense of taste and smell are tied together sometimes. So you may want to start to manufacture different types of flavors that you add to these foods that will appeal to the customers of your client as a scientist. So there are scientists and people in STEM who work in areas that are related to taste. And again, taste is a sense that we have, one of our senses, and that we start to develop from a very young age. And finally, when you think about smell, obviously, you know, as a child, you can sense. People like to say that the baby or the child can smell that their mom's in the room or has gone, right? So these are things that these are connections that you make to your parents. They can smell their milk. But in the larger scheme, the sense of smell is really tied to also science and nature. You can sometimes people say, I think it's an old tale that says you can smell when the rain is coming. So there's a sense that's connected to nature. Or you can smell, obviously, food, like I just said in the previous example with, you know, making flavorings for French fries. You know, you can smell that from driving, even at a distance from that restaurant, you can smell the French fries and it makes you immediately hungry. So in science and in STEM, there are ways to synthesize odors that could appeal to, you know, customers, to people. So it's a really big part of science as well. It's not just a basic sense, but it's where you start to develop these senses that will eventually appeal to the greater fields, the disciplines within STEM. So I just wanted to make that connection that even in science and STEM, we work on these levels professionally, with sound and taste and color changes. But these are senses, basic senses that we have been utilizing from a very young age. And so you say to yourself, what if a kid who is going through this whole process still is not interested in STEM or STEAM, right? So you have a kid who they have sight, they have touch, sound, taste. They're a normal kid, but for some reason they're still not making that connection. Or what is it? How can you encourage them to pursue it, or how can you make them be successful at it later on in life? So I like to start tackling it by thinking about what the problem is. So with early education in STEAM, some of the trouble areas that we often see are kids probably sometimes have difficulty making a connection. So maybe it's just the way that they're being taught. They're not able to make that connection. Different children learn at different pace. So these are things that educators and parents need to be aware of. If you want someone to be successful at something, you have to be able to teach them in a way that they can understand. That's really important. I reiterate this a lot when I give a lot of talks. You start to learn things about that child. You may want to introduce different ways of teaching that science or STEM subject so that the child can understand it and receive it in a manner that's comprehensive to them. Sometimes you have special needs children. That's something teachers need to really be open to. Parents need to be open to that as well. Oftentimes as parents, we don't like to admit that our child may have special needs. Some people look at it as a burden. I don't like to think of it that way, but it's something you have to be open to, because that's how you can actually tailor the education for that child. Knowing what needs that they do have that need to be catered to. Perhaps a child with special needs may not be able to just grab a textbook and read an entire chapter in one sitting, right? The child may need additional assistance. They may need visual aid. They may need auditory aids. Things like that really do provide assistance for students and will enable them to be successful STEM and STEAM students. Sometimes the child is just flat out discouraged because they are initially getting poor grades. And that's a really big issue. As a STEM and a STEAM student, a former student myself, obviously we're all former students, but I had classmates who didn't do well, and some of them just felt like, okay, this is not for me. And they completely just shut it out. They turn it off. So that's something you have to, know when that happens with a child or with a person, an individual, with yourself, you have to think about the bigger picture. It's one grade. How do you move past? The bigger picture is you want to pursue this field. You want to be a doctor. You want to be a nurse. You want to be a scientist. You want to be an engineer, a mathematician. So will this one grade prevent you from moving forward? Is this one grade going to be are you going to let this one grade determine what you do for the rest of your life? So these are things you have to take into perspective. But it's also things that you have to really address. Don't just ignore it. So that's why I like to throw it on the screen. And it's not just early education. This can, follow you throughout the later parts of your career as well. Sometimes at an early age, we get this sort of preconceived notion that being interested in STEM or STEAM is considered geeky. So it has this kind of negative, stigma to it. Like if you're a scientist, and I got this a lot myself. When I told people I was a chemist, even now I say it, I'm a chemist, and people look at me like, what? There wasn't anything else you could do? Like, why chemistry? And I like to think of it as, well, why not? I like it, and I was good at it. So why not stick to it? And why not encourage other people to see that it was fun and there's so much you can do with it. So it's not geeky, because I like to think that I'm cool and I'm hip. My nieces and nephews might not think so, because I'm using words like cool and hip, and they use totally different language now to describe these things. But, that's something else that we have to bear in mind, that growing up, a lot of kids don't have that perception of STEM and STEAM being the cool thing to do. So it's really up to the sort of the older folks, the role models, the mentors, to the teachers, the educators, the organization board members, these people, to make it cool for them and bring them, the information and the content that they can identify with. And which is why I'm so happy to be part of this series, because the speaker lineup is amazing. I was just speaking backstage with the organizers, and having people like this speak to, an audience who, potentially would be interested is really, it's integral in keeping folks interested. And so that kind of takes into the next bullet point, no role models. So you want to obviously make sure that they have role models, because that will sometimes make or break that person if they don't see someone who looks like them doing it then they may not even think that they can be successful. There's really no option for them at that point. Like, this is not for me. My people aren't doing it. I don't see anyone who looks like me doing it. Sometimes, people may be introduced to gender stereotypes, and this usually, again, early education. It sometimes starts in the home. You buy toys for children, and you'll buy the ballerinas and the baby dolls and things. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then for the boys, you'll buy Legos and robots. And these obviously are more tied to STEM, right? You have the engineering aspect, the building, that kind of thing. And there has to be a mix. There has to be a point at which girls should be fairly introduced to these things. And, I'm not a parent to say to those kids to introduce your boys to dolls, but, it's your choice to make it fair across the board. And that's something we have to be aware of, because later on in life, sometimes a young girl or even a male figure will enter into the workforce, and they may not think that they can participate in a particular role because they didn't feel like that was part of their upbringing, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel normal. It wasn't made, to feel like the norm for them. So, we have to be aware of these gender stereotypes, even in the classroom as educators. The roles that you assign to your boy students versus your girl students, that's something you have to be very open to, making sure that it's actually fairly distributed. There are cultural barriers that exist, which sometimes prevent students from being successful in STEM and STEAM. And growing up in different households, obviously within different cultures, and I'm not really pinpointing to one culture in particular, but some cultures may not see that as a reputable, career line. They want you to do, your folks are used to a particular field or area of work, or maybe they have a family business and they want you to continue along those lines, and they don't want you to step outside of that. And that kind of takes into the next bullet point. Maybe sometimes your family has financial limitations that prevent you from pursuing STEM and STEAM and being exposed to all of the resources that would allow you to be successful. So you may want to go, let's say, to medical school. And a lot of students that I've, mentored and taught over the years have expressed to me the expenses that accompany, going to medical school. And sometimes if you come from a family that isn't capable of providing those financial resources, that automatically is a barrier for you. You completely exit out, and that's not something you want to pursue. And it's not just medical school. There are several other professions in the STEM fields that may accompany a financial obligation that families may not be prepared for. But there are ways around that. There are scholarships, there are groups that provide support to students and things of that nature. So but these are things that we have to start to think about and hone in on at a very, very early age before we can really get to the point of success. So some early education necessities, and this is not the complete solution, but these are just some suggestions that I would add, because I do a lot of STEM outreach at the K through 6th grade level as well. So in addition to being an adjunct chemistry professor at the collegiate level, I do work with young kids with STEM. And this is a picture of, it looks like a gumdrop and toothpick bridge exercise that they were doing. So the suggestions, the 3 bullet points say add sound, use visual aids, and make it, something that's kinetic, something that they can, do hands-on activity with. So if the students are not just reading a textbook, but if they are hearing things going on, so you're talking to them, they're talking to each other, you have music in the background, or maybe it's a video playing, showing them the how-to, they have a visual aid. So it could, again, be the video or the hands-on activity in front of them. And then they're actually doing it. So it's hands-on. So those 3 combined usually make for a better STEM or STEAM student, as opposed to someone or to, a person who is just given a book to read that's black and white, and it's just, chapter by chapter, they have to digest a lot of information. So I strongly believe in making STEM interactive, making it fun, making it visual and appealing to the senses. So obviously you can see that each of these bullet points also appeals to the different senses: the sound, vision, and touch. So you're touching things as a child. So all of those senses that I mentioned in the very beginning at an early age, you're incorporating that into STEM education. And this takes me over to also how you build and overcome. So students who may, or children or youth who may feel like they may be at odds and they have these obstacles or blockages or things preventing them from being successful in STEM or in STEAM, at a very early age, they can start to develop this growth mindset. And this is more so for the educators and the parents. So growth mindset, a lot of us know it as adding purpose and relevance to the education and the learning, so that you essentially are aligning what is being taught to the child with their interests and their future goals. So it's kind of like the growth mindset. So you're thinking about their growth, you're thinking about long term, but whatever it is that you're teaching, you're ensuring that they're making that connection. So it's not just a student or someone sitting in a classroom trying to digest and memorize information, but they're actually making a connection to what it is that makes sense to them and that they care about. So that's also another way to, get students interested, to make it, and once you get them interested, they tend to pay attention and retain more information, as opposed to them taking the class, passing it, and then moving on and forgetting about it. And so at the later stages, I talk a lot about early education, and I thought it was important to at least go through that very briefly. But when we think about later stages, so like elementary, high school, and even beyond that, so college and everything, I like to look at two different ways of adding STEM to your path. So you can do so both in the school setting and outside of school. And these are just some ideas I came up with. And these lists that I provide are just my suggestions. There obviously are probably so much more items that could be added to these lists, but things that kind of just jumped to my mind when I started to put this together. So look at the left side of the screen. You see in school. In school, you can, in order to be a successful STEM student, you obviously need to develop good study habits. That's number one. As a professor, that's something I speak to my students about from day one of the semester when we go over the syllabus. You have to be disciplined and develop good study habits. If you like to, if you're the student who likes to leave all of your studying to the night before the exam, so you want to read all the chapters, try to go through all the problems, that's not going to help you. You're probably going to panic on the exam day when you have like one question can throw you off because you say to yourself, I know I read this, you start to get all this anxiety. So developing good study habits is really important because it allows you to retain information more long term. Another thing that you can do as a student and in school is to have constant communication with your teachers and professors. And I say teachers and professors because, again, this is just for students at any age, really. Constant communication, both between the student and the teacher. So if you're a student and your teacher offers study hours where you can go in and talk to them more one-on-one, so not like in a class setting, but talk to them one-on-one, let them know, hey, I'm having difficulty with X, Y, and Z. I don't get it. In the classroom, I may have been a little shy. I didn't want to voice that, in front of my friends, but I really would like some extra help. I think as a professor, I have no problem helping students in that way. But that's for the student, but even for the parents, if there are any parents, viewing who have younger students, keep the communication lines open with the teachers. Because, as a parent, you can take the initiative to help your child, even before the teacher reaches out to you and says your child isn't doing well in such and such a field or a subject. So you may want to reach out and keep it open, maybe do a check-in, a routine check-in with them, email, or however it is that you communicate to make sure that they are getting all of the help that they need both in school and at home. And if there's anything else that you as a parent could contribute, that you can ask the teacher to maybe provide suggestions to you. Another idea to do in school is to join a science or a STEM club or an organization. And this applies both in and out of school, but I just kind of threw it on the school side. But obviously being part of organizations, Omega Phi Beta Foundation, that's a really good one. But there are so many different ones that you can be a part of because these types of organizations and clubs, they expose you to resources. So if you're here tuning in today, you obviously are ahead of the game. You're getting exposed to like these resources that they're providing to you for free. Usually they have, the ability to do that. So take advantage of that when you do have an opportunity. And if you can, and if you're at the age to do so, I would recommend doing internships. So what that does is, this is usually for the older students. So if you have an opportunity to work in the STEM field, so as a science student, technology, or what have you, maybe even shadowing an older professional in their respective workplace. Sometimes the companies, agencies, organizations have intern programs available. So you get exposure before you even kind of set foot through the door professionally. And that will oftentimes give you the firsthand experience that you need to truly be successful once you go out into the workforce. And so out of school, what else can you do? So let's say maybe you're doing all these things already in school, but you want to do additional things to help you get, one step closer to being successful or in the STEM and the STEAM fields. Additional things you can do, continue if you haven't been doing so, visiting museums and zoos. There's so much information in museums. There's all kinds of museums you can visit. I'm from New York, so I used to go to the museums in New York around the city. And again, this is information just kind of like generally speaking. Obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic, things might be different. And so I'm not quite sure what the policies are regarding, if they're open and things like that. Another thing is attending a science festival. So again, take caution where it's needed, but at science festivals, you get to see science experiments, you get to meet industry professionals. There's so much that you can do at these festivals. They have fun activities, hands-on, they let you demo things, they have real scientists coming, so you get to see what it's like, and it's a really nice place to be. It's fun. It feels almost like a carnival, but it's very science-based. And I've attended a few myself. There are lots of really cool ones. A lot of cities have these periodically, sometimes throughout the year. So maybe do a Google search or reach out to organizations that may be affiliated with these to find out when they will be available or in your city. Attend STEAM workshops, again, like today. So if you're here today, you're doing one of the things that I would have recommended. And the last one, tutors. So I used to have tutors when I was a student, and it's something that I would never recommend against. So people like to think of tutors, or not people, but sometimes students, I think, like to think that if they get a tutor, it means that they are not smart, or they're not doing well. Even when I got good grades in classes, I still got tutoring if it was available. And I used to be part of organizations in my school for minority students specifically that provided these additional resources for us. So it was available to me, and I definitely took advantage of it. And I think, even if I was doing well, I may have had one or two homework problems that I needed extra assistance with. So to prevent myself from struggling and spending so many hours at night doing it, I went to tutoring, and my tutor was more than willing to help go through those problems with me as a science student or as a STEM student. This was through like organic chemistry, physics, I mean, you name it. Usually, there's a tutor who can help you get through that. So also, sometimes tutors can teach you different ways of seeing problems. So it's from a different angle. Your teacher or your professor might teach it to you one way, but there may be a different way that you could look at it that might be easier for you to understand. And that was one of the reasons that I loved going to tutoring, because I could always see two sides, and I would basically make the connection for myself. Let's see. Okay. And the last thing that I wanted to kind of recommend as far as, later on stages is getting a mentor. So getting a mentor, on the left side, you see there's a picture of me mentoring girls. So I am a youth mentor. I advocate for mentoring. And this was an event that I did called Be Youtiful. So it's YOU instead of spelling it the conventional way. But at this session, we were just having one-on-one chats with the girls, asking them about different things. And you can see I'm extremely passionate about this. I was having such a good time. But it really helps me to connect. And I myself have a mentor, and I reach out to that individual, and those individuals, I have more than one. Some I reach out to more than others, but they have really helped me, guide me along my path through STEM. And I think without them, I would never have been as successful. I probably would have gotten to the point of success, or, gotten a decent job and all of that, but to really kind of push you a little bit harder and give you that nudge and the reassurance, and to open you up to their resources, because they're sometimes very well connected, these mentors. It's really important to have that in your circle. So that for me was very important, and I try as much as possible to do that also within the programs that I give. And so I have another video here. So I also recently started a program for youth, and I mentor virtually. So ever since the pandemic, I have not had the opportunity to do much mentoring in person like I did in the photo on the left, but I've resorted to doing it virtually. And so there's a session or a program that I like to call Pigtails and Pajamas, where the girls and I meet on a Friday evening, and it's once a month, and we talk about all kinds of things. So we talk about school, we talk about current events, I'm a scientist, so I like to always throw a little bit of science, like sprinkle a little science in there when it's necessary, just to ask them about, what they think. So here's a clip that I'm going to share with you, where it was, I believe it was National Chemistry Week, and I gave them an activity to do to ask them what they thought a scientist looked like, just so that I can kind of see what they were thinking. And you may find that with a lot of youth, you get a similar response. So I'm going to play this clip with you. Hopefully it plays. Before I became a scientist, this is what I thought scientists look like. Picture the scientist, they picture this guy in like a really heavy lab coat, the super extra complex formula. They can look like me, they can look like you. All of us can be scientists. So that was it was a short clip, but it kind of just allows you to see that. Just share my screen here. It allows you to see that. Before I became a scientist, this is what I thought a scientist. Technical difficulties here. It really just allows you to see that students basically have, or youth have, this preconceived notion of what science is and what scientists look like. And so sometimes it's up to us as mentors to be able to have those discussions with them from a very early age, to allow them to express these thoughts and to break the stereotypes, right? To give them useful and valuable information that can allow them to see that it's not always what we think it is. Scientists don't have to wear these hefty lab coats and make super complex formulas and all of that stuff. Scientists and people in STEM, they're like me and you. That's who they are. So, sometimes it really just takes that. And so from that point, I want to kind of fast forward to, once you've decided maybe you're interested in science and STEM, you've gone through the process of high school, you've gotten a mentor, you've gotten tutoring, you've got good grades and all of that. You get into college, and then you start to think, wow, I'm in college now and I want to continue to do STEM, but how do I continue to be successful? Are there things that I should be doing differently? So I like to break it down by year. And again, these are suggestions, things that I have suggested that, may work for students. And in the first year, these are years 1 to 2, so freshman and sophomore year. In the first year, a student can get familiar with the STEM courses at their school. So if there's a STEM program that they're working with at their school, they can understand what the requirements are for that program. And usually these programs have specific courses that the student would be responsible for completing within that program. Another thing that they can do is they have to assess what it is that they like to do. So, if the student likes to do chemistry, then that's something that they should be aware of when they're taking that course. If they like to do biology, they should be aware of that. And so you need to be aware of what it is that you like once you start to hone in on the subject areas that you're going to stick to, because once you start to select those majors or disciplines, you're going to be doing a lot more classes within that realm. So if you're not good at and you don't like biology, you probably shouldn't be a biology major. It's just a suggestion. So start to think about what it is you like to do. Think about what you're good at. Also think about your time frame. So what's your time frame? Do you want to be a scientist? Do you want to go into medicine? Do you want to be in technology? Do you want to be a mathematician, an engineer? What's your time frame? Do these fields and professions work for you in terms of what it is that you set out to do for your time? Something to think about when you're in college and, as a freshman and all of that. I hope my screen is showing as a full screen, because it doesn't look that way on my end. But I'm going to continue. So other things that you can do, is you can, as a sophomore, you can manage your course load. So when I say manage your course load, you have all these courses being thrown at you from early on, freshman and sophomore year, and you're thinking about pursuing a STEM, a STEM area, subject or area or discipline. And you have to be responsible enough to know how to manage those courses so that you're not falling behind for whatever classes are required for your program. So yes, you want to be a biology major or a chemistry major or a technology major, but you see that the college also offers dance and creative writing and things that wouldn't necessarily fit into the prerequisites or the classes that are required, but you want to take it. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I took a lot of those classes. I took yoga once. I think it was like in my junior year of college, and it was great and I loved it. But you have to be able to manage those courses, know what to prioritize. As a sophomore, you can seek funding. I mentioned earlier that sometimes these financial limitations are an issue for students. So if you fall into that category, you may want to think about how you can go about seeking funding or support. You want to ask questions. So you're a student and you're navigating STEM. There are obviously professors who are in the programs. There are upperclassmen that you may, come into contact with. You want to ask questions. You want to ask them, what challenges they faced. If they think the plan that you've laid out is a good one, get feedback. And that's a good resource, because guess what? When you do that, you're avoiding a lot of potential mistakes that you might make and that they've already figured out solutions for. You want to continue to build your network. So you're a student, you're a sophomore, you're in your second year. You probably don't know everyone in the college, but you know quite a bit, right? This is your second year. You want to start to expand that network, see what other folks are doing. You never know when you may need to lean on those people for, information, for guidance, for tutoring, for, an inside to an internship or something like that. So build your network. And this helps too, especially because it carries over into your professional world as well. So not just as a student, but you always want to build your network, even when you're an adult. In your last 2 years of college, and this is if you obviously attend a senior college, it's a 4-year program, you want to obviously do some volunteer research. So here's a picture of me, and this is a picture of me in a lab, and this is back when I was an undergrad, and I'm not quite sure if this was my junior or senior year, but it was one of the two, and I'm doing research in a lab. So, and this was volunteer. So this was in addition to me doing my classes as a chemistry major. I took biology, I took chemistry, I took physics, all of that. But in addition to that, I wanted to really see what research was like, because I knew it was something I was considering pursuing. But if you really don't get a foot in the door or your hands wet, into the mix, you may not really have a good idea of what it is that you're getting into, and you don't want it to be something that you completely hate. So I was doing chemistry research in a lab, volunteering as a student, and that was really where I kind of solidified my interest. And in order to be truly successful, you want to make sure that what it is that you're doing interests you, right? Because otherwise it might feel like a chore, a task, it might feel like a burden, it might feel boring. So you want to be passionate about the things that you do. And the passion may not come right away. It may take you trying different variations of it out first, which is what I also did. Again, you could do this through internships. You could do it, you can attend STEM conferences. So as a student, there are so many conferences that are available to you to attend, where you get to see other students like yourself presenting their research, talking about things. You get to meet other schools, you get to meet organizations, you get to attend workshops where you can talk about how to build a STEM resume, which is a totally different presentation in itself. But I mean, all of these things help you to be truly successful as a STEM student and a STEM professional, because you need to know how to be able to take all of these things and put it into your portfolio. And obviously the tips that I'm giving now from years 1 through 4 in college will help you to build that portfolio. If there's an opportunity for independent study, which is very similar to the volunteer research. Volunteer research sometimes is just basically you asking a professor to do work in their lab. Independent study usually ties into like a grade. So your major, let's say if you're a chemistry major or a biology major, or just you can throw in any name in there, and you're doing independent study, the department will have a program or some credits that they would apply to you for doing that research or that study. And then maybe you'll have to write a paper summarizing your findings at the end of the semester, and you get a grade for it. And also publish if it's possible. So if you're a young STEM adult in the STEM fields, you're doing research, any of that stuff. If there's an opportunity for you to publish this information, you might not be publishing as a first author, but in the professor whose lab that you're working, or with the senior graduate student who you're working with, you may be able to get on the tail end of a publication. And that's really important, especially for your success as a STEM professional, because once you become a STEM professional, and I use that word professional at this point, you get into your career, people are going to look at you to see, well, what credibility do you have? What have you done? What have you presented? Or what contributions have you made to science that I should be interested in what you have to say? Right? So when people start to ask these questions of you as a STEM professional, you can pull out your publication and say, well, I worked on this project in a lab and I actually did this data. Here it is. Here's my publication. Here's my credibility. So if you can get on a paper, and you obviously would be contributing to that research, I highly recommend it. As a senior, you start to weigh your options. So you're getting to the end of your program. Think about what it is that's available to you. Scan the job market. Reconnect with your old professors, right? You connect with them and you say, hey, I'm graduating, or I'm ending my program soon. I want to just touch base with you. I may need a recommendation letter. Recommendations are really important in STEM. This is a professor saying that you are capable of performing whatever task it is that you're applying for, whether it's a graduate program or a job that you want to apply for, right? These people they can back you up, right? They can account for you. So you want to continue to make those connections and to keep those connections current with the professors and the teachers that you have gone through and met throughout the process. If you're in college, obviously you may want to consider a post-bac, which basically just means post-baccalaureate. And so after you got your bachelor's degree, you may not have enough prerequisites to enter into a graduate program. So you may need to take additional classes because the program you want to do requires that you take additional classes. So you may want to reach back out to your university or the college you went to and see if they have a post-bac program. So you're not re-enrolling as an undergraduate, but you're just taking those additional classes and they have it in a program that's available. You want to think about preparing a personal statement. So if you're not a good writer, that would be the time to get help. A personal statement, it sells to whoever it is that you're making your pitch to, that they should be looking at you and they should be considering you. So a personal statement will talk about your experience. It'll talk about your research. It'll talk about why you are a fit candidate for the graduate program or the job position that you're applying for. And you also want to prepare for the interview. So a lot of these positions that you go on to after you graduate from college will require you to be interviewed, even if it's by a hiring committee or a graduate committee, or whatever organization you want to enter into. They're going to be interviewing you and talking to you and seeing if you're capable of communicating, right? Not just communicating with using your interpersonal skills, but are you capable of communicating the science or the STEM, right? That you are doing or that you want to continue doing within their programs. Something else I like to throw in there. I talked about being a part of a 4-year college program, but something that people don't often think about is, and something that I actually talked about very early on, is financial limitations. So think about what you can afford when you start thinking about college. And this is obviously important to STEM, but it's important to students in general. You may only be able to afford, a public 2-year program or college. And that's the very first bar that I have on the top. You see that tuition and fees, which is in the dark blue bar at the very first level. It's roughly about $3,700. And this is a 2019 to 2020 report that I got from College Board. And if you decide to stay, on campus, room and board is an additional about $9,000. And then you add other things onto there, transportation, books, so on and so forth. So I think it comes up to about 18,000. But again, that's if you add all these additional things. I went to school in New York City. I went to a 4-year college, but it was a city university. So tuition there was so much lower. And again, it was public, so it wasn't private. And so these are things that you can consider. So if you want to pursue STEM at the collegiate level, so within college, and you may not want to jump straight into a 4-year program, you could consider a 2-year program. There are advantages to starting off with a 2-year program. I don't necessarily push students into one or the other, but I like students to think about what works for them. And so the report goes on to show you, obviously, as you go further and further down, the expenses become more depending on if you go to private versus public 2 or 4-year college. So again, the most expensive one being a private 4-year college. If you go to a private 4-year college, tuition could be, I think that number says like $53,000. So that's a lot of money for some people, right? If you're not on scholarship, you might say to yourself, there's no way, I'm not pursuing STEM, I'm not going to college, this is not for me. But don't let that be a barrier. There are so many different ways around it. There are scholarships that you could apply for, financial aid, choosing the right program for you could also be a help, choosing the right college length. So you want to start off with a 2-year college, see how you do, and then maybe take it on to a senior college later on. Why start a 2-year college? So I said there are some advantages. There are cost savings, right? So again, you saw in the previous slide, it's a little bit cheaper, smaller class sizes. So, you know, the senior colleges tend to have huge auditoriums, right, for lecture. And sometimes students can't make the connection with STEM, especially think about being in a physics class, which, and I just throw physics as an example, in a lecture with maybe like 200 to 300 students, and the professor is this tiny dot at the front, and you're trying, you know, to take the notes down, understand, and you feel like, oh, I can't ask a question. There's no way I'm asking a question in front of all these students. So that maybe that might be an issue for you, and you might do better if you're in a 2-year college. And, you know, in STEM, this is not the type of a subject or discipline where you can be shy about understanding things and asking questions. So if you're more comfortable in that type of a setting, that might be something you might want to consider. It might be an easier transition for you from high school, because high school tends to be more, you know, a smaller environment, more feel more comfortable. And so transitioning into a 2-year college might feel a little easier for you than jumping into a bigger 4-year college or university setting. The time commitment, obviously, it's implied in the title, 2-year. So it's a 2-year program. So you're not committing to 4 years just yet. Some people, that might be an issue for them because they don't know if they have that time commitment or they want to stay within the program. So you may want to give it a try for 2 years and see how the program goes. You know, and last bullet point, you get a degree after your 2 years. You get an associate's degree usually. And then you can decide at that point, do I want to work a little bit? Maybe there are some, you know, job opportunities that are available, or do I want to continue on to a 4-year college? So those are some of the advantages, I think, to trying to go the 2-year route versus the 4-year route that you can consider. Here are a few STEM jobs or areas that I think students may want to consider. If you want to be a successful STEM student, you obviously want to know what the job market looks like. And where you can actually work. What does being successful in STEM mean? Where does that put me? What options do I have? You can work in so many different areas in STEM. You can work in government or law enforcement. That's where I work now. You can work in academia. Obviously, you can be a professor, work in a research lab, pharmaceutical lab, industry. You can work in science policy. You can be a science writer. So you can write textbooks. You can write I actually was recently speaking to a panelist for a different presentation who does medical communication. So basically she takes all the complex science information and she puts it into really nice graphics and small bullet points so that industry heads and officials could present it to the public. So there's a really big field for that. People, you know, these are real scientists, people who actually do science and STEM, and they have to understand the information, but also be able to like chalk it down to like, you know, bite-sized pieces for the public. So there are professions where you can do that as well. You can work in television, museums, obviously. You can work as a QA or QC specialist, and that just means quality assurance or quality control. So if there's a company that's making a product, they obviously want to make sure that their product is durable or reproducible. So if you're making, let's say I have bottled water and you're a company that starts to manufacture these bottles, you want to make sure that all the bottles are the same size, shape, same strength. You don't want to make one bottle that obviously starts to melt when the water goes in, or, you know, has some kind of defect. So these QA and QC specialists, they run all kinds of tests on the products as they come out of the machine to make sure that they're fit to be packaged and put on a shelf. That's a scientist, that's a STEM, someone in STEM. a safety and health consultant. So that's someone who looks at safety and health conditions in the workplace. And I also work in that area. So that person also takes into account the science behind all of these health issues in the work environment. And there's so much more. This list is not exhaustive, but these are just examples of areas that one can consider when they're pursuing STEM. And if they want to pursue it, don't necessarily limit yourself to just one thing or one job. Be open to the possibility of entering into these fields. So I like to show this slide. I know it's a little wordy, and I don't often like to put a lot of words on a slide, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of my story so that you guys have an idea of like where I came from, even though Lisa presented my bio in the beginning. So you have a general overview, but I was an undergraduate, obviously at Hunter College. I was a chemistry major. While I was there, remember I said to you, always an opportunity to get a scholarship. So I got scholarships wherever they were. I was looking for them. And as a STEM student, that's really important because you want to take most of your time to study. You don't necessarily want to have to devote too much of your time to working, because sometimes as college students, we go to school and then we work, we have a job. But if you can get that financial support, you can devote most of your time to studying where it is needed. And remember, I said you have to develop good study habits. So I did that. But even while I was doing science, I always found an opportunity to relax. So I also played volleyball, Go Hawks. That was our mascot. Also, you want to take part in some internships if you have an opportunity. So I took part in several internships at SUNY Downstate, Columbia University, worked on so many different projects. I won't get into all the details, but I did list them in case anyone's interested. Then I went to graduate school. I did more internships in graduate school. So it doesn't end, it doesn't end with just undergrad or even high school. You can do it further on along your career. The important thing is I did research at all points of my, student career. So I did it in high school, undergrad, grad school, and I did research as a postdoc, meaning after I got my doctorate degree. And these are some of the areas that I worked in. Currently, I work in science policy. So I was a former federal investigator, but I've converted over to the area of science policy, working specifically in industrial hygiene, which I mentioned before. It's like safety and health in the workplace. So it's still science. So you're still using scientific tools and scientific methods, but you're using them in order to understand how the workplace can be better. And even while doing all that, I still am very passionate about education, especially in STEM. So I do work as an adjunct professor at multiple, I've worked at multiple colleges. I don't work currently at multiple colleges. I only work at one because I don't have the bandwidth to do all of that. But I made it a point to always continue to work at a college because I want to continue to support students along their journeys and to give them what I felt like I got from my own experience. So that's basically just kind of my story in a nutshell. And the reason I like to share that slide, and obviously at the bottom it says I do so much more, is because I like to share that in the STEM field, you can wear many hats. And I have had firsthand experience doing that. So on the very left, you see that I worked as an investigator, as I mentioned before. This is kind of what I looked like going out when I worked as an investigator. Ignore my silly pants. I like to show this because it's really funny. And it shows that even as an investigator, a federal investigator, I got to wear what I wanted for the most part. So I have on my PPE, my hard hat, my safety glasses, my high vis vest. I look like a construction worker. In fact, I was going onto a construction site. So I had to prepare myself kind of like they would prepare themselves for safety. I have my steel toe boots on. So there I am as a scientist, as a STEM professional, but I'm working in that particular work environment, which you can do. And then at the top in the middle, you see that I work as an adjunct professor. So this is me taking a selfie in my classroom right before my students came in. And you see my periodic table in the background. I have my goggles on and my safety, my lab coat. So we were getting ready for class. On the bottom in the middle, I mentioned I strongly advocate for youth. So I participate in programs that do a lot of STEAM outreach. And this is after one of our workshops where we worked on a density rainbow experiment. So if you look at the glass, you see that there are liquids of different colors. And these are actually different liquids that I've used food coloring to dye. And because they have different densities, they can actually be layered one on top of the other and sit in the glass. That was a really fun activity for students to do, and it incorporated art into STEM. So remember, STEM, I said, has transitioned into STEM plus art, which is STEAM. So it's hands-on, it was interactive. The students could have used all kinds of liquids in their own home, so they didn't have to go out and buy these expensive chemicals or anything. But it was a really good lesson in density, and it showed them how sciences and everything around us. They can now see things and probably pick up some water and some oil and say to themselves, oh my God, these have different densities. I know what that means now. And on the top right, you see me working, well, actually, no, let's go to the bottom left. It says that I was a bench chemist. So I did work in a lab at one point. This is me in front of an instrument. You can see in the cupboards on top of my, behind my head, there are bottles of chemicals and things that we used in a lab. So I did do that at one point. And currently, the top right, it says policy scientist. So this is me working as a policy scientist. I do a lot of writing. So it's not really being in the lab anymore. It's more so looking at technical documents, reviewing them, providing input, being on conference calls, talking a lot, doing a lot of presentations, communicating the science, and, educating the public, the general public. So, as a STEM professional, you can be involved in one of any of these things. And success isn't necessarily defined by any one thing in particular. I like to think that I was successful doing each of these things, and each of these things allowed me to use the skills that I was able to, develop throughout my process, my educational journey. So a lot of the things and the tips that I provided in the previous slides, they were useful to me as a student going through the process myself, because it also allowed me to make an easy transition from one career to the next. And I like to always think about the STEM fields as being like connected, or like an ecosystem. So they're not separate and apart, but skills that you learn from one, you can apply to another. And you see that within the jobs as well. Sometimes you see a job application saying, we need skills for someone who has a background in, analytical measurements or data analysis, something just kind of very general and broad. And you learn a lot of these skills in school, but you also can do them, and they apply to all of these positions that I've worked in. So that's something to bear in mind. A lot of the skills that you acquire through your STEM education can allow you to be successful within these fields once you enter into the workforce. The last slide that I like to share, and I'm not sure why there's red going across my screen, I apologize for that, but is in addition to doing all that, I mentioned in the very beginning that I wrote a book about how kids can continue to be encouraged and to pursue STEAM. And it's a children's book. And again, I like to target them and to start young, because that's where they start to develop all of those critical senses and things like that, and make the connections. So I thought it was important to write a book that they would enjoy looking at. It has beautiful illustrations throughout the book, but it also tells a really good story about a group of friends who they're navigating school, and they encounter, difficulties through the process. And these are difficulties that we can resonate with even as adults. And it shows how they overcome these problems working together. So it's a story on friendship, but it's also a story on STEAM and excellence, and it's fun. And it has lots of good appendices for students. So the slide that I showed previously, where it showed the different fields and areas that you could participate in as a STEM professional, there's an appendix that shows a little more detail about that. It has a really cool breakdown of the science of cooking in there, so kids might be interested in that. So I like to include, little things that I thought that students would be interested in. Not because I wanted it to be a textbook per se, but I also wanted it to be a good resource to them as well. And so that takes me to the end. And I think I stayed within my 1 hour, so I'm so excited. But so I would love to take questions if there are any, but I would also like to stay connected. So I am available on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect with me there, but you can also connect with me on all of my other social media platforms, which are located below. I go by the name Classy Chemist on social media. So on Instagram and YouTube, you can find me at Classy Chemist. On Facebook and Twitter, I go by Classy Cheminist, which is kind of a play on the word feminist. And you can check on my website, classychemist.com, or send me an email, info@classychemist.com. So I'm open. I see that Carmen has a question or a hand raised. So
amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jasmine, thank you. You shared a lot of valuable sources and resources, and you took us from like the beginning, and I don't want to say the end because it's not the end, but somewhat towards that. And it sounds like you realize children need a lot of connection to inspire growth, and in order to provide a sustainable approach to help children blossom. With this being said, it sounds like it's a holistic approach also in highlighting and nurturing growth. Can you please share some tips you follow to get children and adults excited about science? And if you have time, what sparked your passion towards chemistry?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. Thank you, Carmen. So getting kids and adults excited, I think it really just takes them just getting involved, like making that initial step, taking the initial step to get involved. And I think once the ball gets once they start, that gets the ball rolling, they start to be a little bit more open-minded to, all of the different opportunities that are available to STEM and STEAM. For me personally, I started getting into STEM and STEAM from a very early age, but it took one of my professors who actually pushed me in the direction of participating in a science fair, which is what kind of sparked my curiosity. So as part of the science fair, one of the requirements was that I needed to do research and to have a project ready to present. So for students, it could be a science fair or even like a show and tell in school. And I don't know if they do that too much anymore nowadays, but teachers can encourage students to do it that way. For adults, I would say start to follow people who you think make things interesting and fun for you. You don't have to bore yourself with STEM. I think that's kind of like one of the negative ideas that are like that people like to project about STEM and STEAM and science and even chemistry, that it's boring, it's difficult, it's geeky, it's hard, and I don't like to entertain those thoughts. I actively seek out, things that interest me. So if there's an article that I see that's so like informative or fun, I'll share it with a group of friends, or I'll post it to my social media page, or I'll follow someone who I think is doing something positive in that area of science. And that continues to make me feel encouraged, because when I see those positive images over and over, I start to see the possibilities. They're endless when you see that happening. And so I think your second question was what sparked my interest. Again, it was the professor who encouraged me to participate in a science fair. It really kind of, initially it introduced me to being part of that community. And science in the STEM fields, it's really like a community of innovative thinkers and people who like to think outside the box, who like to pose questions and answer them. That's really what you see when you enter into that community. And it started to make me think like them and see the world like them. And I like that. I like to be critical and analytical and to channel those different types of perceptions. And I continued doing it. And as I navigated the process, I enjoyed the support that I got along the way. And as I mentioned before, I want to do the same for students coming after me, which is why I'm so passionate about being actively involved in education and, youth advocacy and things of that nature, because I think it's really important to give them that support to get to that point.
Yeah,
Thank you. I have a question. Well, first of all, thank you for presenting this. I think these tips apply to anything you're interested in, even if it's not STEM. So I really appreciate that you went through that thoroughly, and that you also broke it down for 2-year and 4-year, because a lot of people do get intimidated. And you made it simple and fun.
Absolutely.
I personally ran away from chemistry. So in high school, many moons ago, but you made it sound so interesting, and it was like, yay. But I did go in the math world. So I'm in research. I do everything with numbers and things like that. But anyway, my question for you is, and I'm stealing this from Marty because I have a son and he's going to be 7. So he's so into Avengers. And Marty asks this all the time. What superhero, and it doesn't have to be Avengers, it can be DC or X-Men or whatever. What superhero would be like the STEM superhero?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never actually thought about that. But I personally love Black Panther. And the movie, obviously, Wakanda, if you guys, obviously, I think everyone's familiar with the movie now. It's like so advanced when it comes to STEM. Like you see Suri's lab, and I felt such a connection watching that movie. I wanted to live there. I wanted to be in her lab. I want our future to look like that. So I feel like that's that's the first thing that came to mind when you asked. Like that's the biggest connection that I feel to STEM, because they were so advanced and they were using technology in a way that we hope to use it at some point in the future. And even if it's not specifically hardcore science, they're all still connected. Like I said, it's an ecosystem.
Awesome. Go ahead, Marty.
That was awesome. So thank you, Yasmin, again. Dr. Daniels, make sure we get that right. We want to thank everybody for coming out today and remind you that next Saturday we are live again. It'll be my session actually, which is pretty cool. We'll be going over design, primarily designing a logo for your brand or your business, or even just something you want to do on the side. So we'll be going step by step on how we accomplish that. I've built brands for and worked with clients like Eminem, Wu-Tang, Def Jam, and a lot of other big names I've worked with and worked for and partnered with.
Lil Mama.
Lil Mama, a long time ago, right? A whole lot of clients that we could work with. I've worked with Disney. The list goes on. AT&T, BMW. I'm also an IBMer, so I bring in a lot of design thinking into the process. So we'll start from scratch, picking a name, picking colors, and we'll work our way through the process. And then I'll also give you some insight onto things like trademarking and copywriting, and some tips on how to get your logo in front of the masses and how to properly present it in pitch decks and things like that. So you want to stay tuned. You want to come to that session. We'll be here next Saturday, 1 o'clock, same time, same bat station. And again, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll